And welcome back, everybody, to our track, which is, of course, DevSecOps. Now, it is with great pleasure. Now, on the schedule, this actually says something teaming, but actually, in preparation, or the slides have changed a little bit. The title of the talk is Becoming a Cloud Native Red Team, Practicing What You Preach. So it's with great pleasure we welcome to our track Josh from Contino. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I realized that this talk has changed name a couple of times because people have requested slightly different names. So yeah, it moves around a little bit, but the talk is still the same, still what was promised. So I'll kick off. So with this talk, I actually start off with probably the one thing that everyone takes away from this. And this is one of my favorite words of all time, which is a Japanese word called sujigiri. And so far, whenever I've done this in person, no one's known what this meant on the face of it, which I think is a shame, but everyone remembers it at the end. And what it actually means is trying out a new samurai sword on a random passerby. And that's very much the intent and the mindset with which this talk kind of came into being in the first place. So unfortunately, I have to do an obligatory about me slide because you give a conference talk, you have to say who you are and why you should listen. So I'm Josh, I'm the AWS practice lead at Contino here in the UK. And why you should listen to me about security is I lived half my life in a prison colony. You may be more familiar with it being called Australia, but still, I feel that that adds something to a security-based talk. What we were trying to do, and I'll get into the story of what we did, but really, we're always trying to shift learning left. We always talk about shift left testing, shifting everything to the left. And what's often sometimes unfortunately missed in that is shifting the learning left. Like how can you learn quicker? Very much Eric Ries, lean startup, build, measure, learn loop. But we kind of took that focus and applied it to security. And this story comes from in a previous life working at a different consultancy that was we were trying to look at how we could shift our security learning left. Because if you work at, well, generally, you don't want to be learning security once the breach has happened or once the thing has happened. You kind of want to learn and test your things before that happens. So, I mean, everyone will have seen this kind of graph. It's all over the place. And effectively, it's used often. And I guess where I probably first came across it was with testing. But the idea is the quicker you can catch things, the cheaper it is. And it doesn't go linearly over time, it's exponential. So if you can test your security processes and really kind of drive that and do this, what has been termed since I did this, security chaos engineering, which I quite like. But if you can go through this process, you can shift that learning earlier and make it a lot cheaper to learn. And instead of having the breach and having to manage your data breach notifications, other things, you can be ahead of the game. And when it comes to learning and knowledge, there was a famous general back in the US about 20 years ago who said there's three kinds of knowledge that exist. You've got known knowns, which are the things you know. You've got known unknowns, which are the things you know that you don't know. And then you've got unknown unknowns, which are the things you don't know yet. I can say that again. It's easier when it's written down as that one, but effectively, what this process was trying to do was to try and unearth these unknown unknowns. When you look at chaos engineering, security chaos engineering, that's really what it's about. It's very easy to threat model your way to find known knowns and known unknowns. But sometimes you really have to get in the weeds and get involved to start digging out these unknown unknowns. Now, in the security space, I think there's quite a few known knowns that people generally agree on, right? I mean, one of them is security is everyone's responsibility. Your security posture is only as strong as your weakest link in your chain. This is something that has to be fundamental. Security is not something that is siloed to the InfoSec team. It has to be, there is a base level of security knowledge and expertise that everyone has to have. It's not everyone has to be an absolute security expert. That's completely unreasonable. But how can you give everyone this ability to be competent enough, to know enough? Another known that is commonly had is an instant response process. Everyone has it written down somewhere. When was the last time you tested it and you actually ran through it? When was the last time it was revised? how do you ensure that people read it and know it, right? Like, just because it's down on paper is awesome, but if it's not in people's heads, or they don't know where to go, or they haven't looked at it in 2 years, it's a fundamental problem that you don't want to be learning what your incident response process is when everything's going wrong. And in this case, I didn't realize how much of a flex this was going to be a couple of years down the line, but we were able to take advantage of co-locating at the time. The company, as it was as a consultancy, was generally split across a variety of different clients over a city. And instead, for this, we pulled everyone together. We were trying to constrain the difficulties and the challenges here. And by putting everyone in the same room, you knew that communication was going to be high bandwidth, that people would bounce off each other, rather than having everyone having to all of a sudden drop tools at a client site and go, oh, wait, there's something else going on. This is something where the consultancy, we actually invested in this by pulling everyone off client site. Effectively, our revenue for this day was zero, which as a consultancy normally gets people quite concerned. But these are the kind of things, and these are the kind of actions that you have to do to invest. I mean, this became a myth within the company that really helped build out the culture long term. And I'll talk to kind of the longer term effects of what that brought on towards the end. Another thing we did was we planned this out. And I was on the red team side, so I had all the fun, but we had expected avenues that we thought people would do. We thought we knew what people would do when we actually started attacking our own infrastructure. So naturally, we had kind of planned countermeasures and planned counters and all that kind of stuff. So we planned that out in advance. And with these things, they do require some amount of planning. It's not like you have to go into a room and lock yourself away for a week to plan to do a security chaos engineering event. But it's more, if you can kind of cover off what people are expecting to do, you can make it a bit more challenging, a bit more fun. And also, when you actually have a breach, these people are going to be experts at breaching most of the time, in which case, your expected avenues, they're going to have them covered off anyway. Then we'll just quickly step into known unknowns. What did we know we wanted to figure out through this process? One of the key things with this is, how do you actually measure performance? If you're going through kind of a breach scenario, how are you going to measure so when you do it again, you can see if you've improved? Potentially you can cross-reference to other companies, but in this case, I think it's more about sticking within the company and just improving yourself. This should be used very much not as a stick to hit people to try and make them better, but more as a carrot and something fun to get people involved. And what we did is we picked 3 metrics by which we wanted to measure. So the first was time to identify. So from how long, once the actual red team event started, did it take the blue team to notice something was happening? One thing about this is everyone that was on the blue team had absolutely no idea when they woke up that morning they were going to be on the blue team. We didn't tell them. We just started attacking our own infrastructure and seeing how long it took to notice. Because in reality, you don't have people standing there all the time. You need to make sure that your monitoring and notifications are in place, so if a breach happens, you know. The second metric that we picked was time to contain. So once the breach had happened, and once I was having all the fun getting through all our AWS accounts, how long did it take before we were contained? How long before the blue team was actually able to get on top of the red team and make it so we had no more access? And the third one was, of everything we managed to do, how much of it did they find? And we gave them we gave them the afternoon to try and figure out exactly what we'd done, but how much did they actually find of everything that we did? Another thing that was really interesting that we wanted to find out was who was going to take responsibility. Now, the people who came up with the idea for the red team were the 3 directors of the consultancy, and they made sure that they would not be on site when this happened. The 2 people doing the red team activity were 2 of the most, myself and one other, who were some of the most senior engineers at the company. We were also going to be mysteriously absent when this happened. So really, it's interesting to see what happens when you take your kind of, I don't want to say chain of command, but I can't think of a better term, and you make it so that's not there. What happens when people have to figure out, and the people they normally go to are not available. Another kind of general rule of thumb that we had in the space was that generally when we have a process, if you scale to 3 times the size, that process will break. And at the company at the time, we had scaled about 3 times. We were about 3 times the size that we were about 12 months before. And a lot of our incident response processes predated even myself joining. So they were 18 months, 2 years old. And we'd gone from about probably 5 people when they were first designed to 30 people. Chances are they would no longer work. And we needed to test that. But sometimes you can't really test this by thinking about it. You need to do something. And the last known unknown was, what lenses do people possess? Now, this is something that I, for people who have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, never shut up about. But when we talk about people being able to, that level of security expertise everyone needs to have, generally with software developers, they can't look at things through a security lens because they haven't kind of got some of the scars, they haven't got the experience, they haven't been given the room to grow to get this lens in the first place. So they naturally look through a software development lens, and they look about code doing what it should and getting the feature out the door. What you want to do, and this is critical to SRE, it's critical to DevOps, is try and give people many lenses. You want to broaden their skill set and broaden the way they can look at something. So whether it's, in this case, is what I'm doing secure? Am I setting up my KMS keys properly? Am I enforcing encryption? Am I doing sensible things? And from an operational perspective, one of the things that I often go on about is, okay, the code looks like it works. How will I know if it doesn't? How will I be able to operate this in production? And generally, normally based on people's backgrounds, you can get this, but you can't go and send people off to go do security engineering for 3 years and I'll come back when you're done. So this was really a case of, can we give people that security lens quickly and easily? And then unknown unknowns. We had no idea what we were going to find on this space. That's kind of the point. And, this is where chaos engineering and Gremlin came into it as well. We didn't use Gremlin, but chaos engineering has become actually productized and become something that many teams are doing and are introduced even to kind of some of the biggest enterprises around are starting to go down this path. So very quickly, if you're doing this, this is a word to the wise, set rules of engagement. Generally, there were certain things we weren't allowed to do from the red team perspective, i.e. I wasn't allowed to completely break all access straight away, because that kind of stops your blue team from being able to do anything. This is about setting a good level of challenge, not maximizing the level of challenge, right? You don't want, and you want also probably worth setting up a cost maximum as well. So everyone doesn't just go and run up 32x larges all over the place, and all of a sudden you've bankrupted the company in a day. So from that, we'll actually move on to the actual story of the day. So we kicked off at 10 o'clock with an initial salvo. So what we did here was we started looking at a few AWS accounts, and we started just getting around and seeing if people noticed. One of the critical things we did as part of this was the AWS accounts that we disabled were all the most senior people's. What we left were the more junior people. They were the only ones who could actually interact with AWS anymore. And this was very much a point to try and channel the learning through the more junior members in the company, as opposed to like the seniors kind of huddle off, go off and fix it by themselves. This was about getting everyone involved. Now at 10:03, 3 minutes after we started, we intentionally tripped a wire. As it was a consultancy focusing cloud native, we knew there were alerts in place. If anyone stood up an EC2 machine, we actually had an alert go off to go, hey, something's a bit weird here. That's unexpected access. So naturally, we tried to trigger some of the alerts because otherwise we weren't sure people were ever going to find out. Also, at the same time, we sent a pre-crafted email that went on about the tooling that we had in place, which was cloud conformity at the time, making it look like that to see how many people clicked through, how many people, and bearing in mind we were all engineers, how many people actually got phished. And it was a little bit depressing that some of them did click it, but good to know, right? 6 minutes after that, a message went out on Slack going, hey, something's going a bit weird here. Something's going on. Can we have someone to look at it? And this was one of the more senior people. His access had already been shut off. But a minute later, someone that, yeah, hey, cool, I'll come and help, on Slack. I'll come and help you. So naturally, instantly, we disabled her access as well. And you might be asking how we knew what was going on when we were not in the room. We'd actually had a plant. We had a fly on the wall. One of the people in the room knew that it was happening, so he could actually feed back to us conversations that were going on in the room. So yeah, we'll see what happened to him as it went on, because people started to notice. 3 minutes after that, the alert went out on Slack saying, this is not a drill. Something is going on. We're losing AWS access. Things are being created. We need to do something about this. Everyone needs to drop tools. 5 minutes after that, the CEO got a phone call. Now, he was sitting across the table from me, and I saw him with this massive grin on his face, quite happily just turn his phone over and go back to sipping his coffee. The interesting part about this is actually step one on the incident response plan. So, from this actually happening, it took quite, 17 minutes for the first action, the very first top of the page to be done. One of the things that you'll notice if you do this is that an organic structure ends up coming through. And what happened in this space was you ended up with this. The very first person who had identified the breach and called everyone to down tools and help ended up at the top, and everyone was feeding into him. So this ended up, I couldn't fit them all on the slide, but this ended up at a 1-to-20 ratio of one person at the top, 20 people underneath them. You can probably imagine what happened. Their head set on fire. They couldn't possibly handle everyone coming into them at once. The structure didn't work, but naturally you can see how people would naturally go towards this as the structure. So at 10:28, the call went out, stop and regroup. Can everyone just stop what they're doing? Can we reorganize ourselves? Can we actually get some situational awareness in here? Can we figure out what's going on? 10:30, there was an access poll. Who actually still had access? So now they could start to actually channel the kind of countermeasures through the people who could actually have access, and they could understand how many people still did. At 10:37, they split that leadership role into two. So they had the leader at the top, who was the initial person, and then they had someone acting as kind of a comms officer coming in. So everyone's filtering information to the comms officer, who was filtering and replaying it to the leader. So now they're starting to build out a structure which is allows a little bit more parallel action, and also meant his head was no longer on fire. At 10:41, that fly on the wall got kicked out of the room because they asked him why he wasn't helping. And he didn't really have much to say about it. So they realized at this point, we had actually told them that it was a training event, but to treat it as if it was real, partly to just get the adrenaline to kick down a couple of levels and make it so people weren't quite so stressed. But then it became highly competitive because they knew who was on the other side. So whether that worked or not, I don't know. At 10:48, I actually managed to break out of AWS. Someone had put a GitHub OAuth token in AWS that was not encrypted. It was just sitting in parameter store. Naturally, I went into their GitHub profile and started creating repositories. And this kind of comes into one of the core components of AWS that I don't think is talked about enough. And partly, I think it's probably because it's actually quite hard. It's quite a hard service to get right, and that's KMS. People need to be able to do KMS properly. Otherwise, it's very hard to protect things from malicious users, credentials that have got compromised. Like if you just have things encrypted with KMS keys that allow anyone in the account to do stuff, you might as well have not really had it in the first place. But this isn't a service that normally people invest time in learning, or is something that people find a little bit too hard, so they move on. So at 10:50, also on the Western Front, they realized that they probably shouldn't be talking on Slack because they knew we could see it. So instead, they all moved to Hangouts. And all of a sudden, we had no fly on the wall anymore, and they'd gone off Slack. So we no longer, as the red team, knew what was going on. So naturally, at that point, what do? You send the COO and the CTO back into the room, start feeding you information again, because they can't kick them out of the room. And a few minutes after that, the blue team reported that, okay, they think they had everything controlled. They thought they actually had us contained at that point, and they were quite happy to say to the CTO and the COO, no, it's all under control. They asked us, and we were like, no, we're still doing stuff. They have not found us at all. And another 18 minutes later, they actually came to the realization that, yes, they had not caught us. I was getting more and more in their face with creating stuff right in front of them until they realized that they hadn't actually found me yet. 5 minutes after that, myself and the red team, we did actually reveal ourselves. We sent a photo on Slack. We copped a lot of abuse, but really that just fired us up a little bit more. And 8 minutes after that, they actually did have us contained. We lost all the access, all the IAM users, all the access keys, everything else that we managed to create for ourselves was now caught. And at 10 to 12, we walked back into the room to a variety of verbal abuse and quite a few rude hand gestures, if I'm honest. But that was quite fun. I've never quite been abused like that walking into a room before. It's quite invigorating. And then at that point, it went from containment to remediation. So actually, can we undo everything we did? Now, naturally, we'd kept a log of everything we'd done so we could unroll it all, but it was also that curiosity of, can they find it? And what we had said going out to this is there was a time limit on this. If we weren't contained by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we were going to stop anyway, because at that point, you know, the lessons have been learned. It's just bordering on masochistic at that point to keep going. So one of the core things from this is the concept from Lean of Kaizen, of continuous improvement. And this is where I was saying with the metrics, it's not about good or bad. It's about doing better the next time and using them as a jumping point to get to better. So let's look at the 3 metrics that we had. Time to identify was 12 minutes. Again, I don't know if that's good or bad, and I don't really care. It's just that's how long it took. If we did it again, would it be faster? Would it be slower? You know, this actually gives us a point to actually have that Kaizen and that improvement and make it so we are actually getting better over time. Time to contain was 1 hour and 28 minutes. Again, I don't know if that's good or bad. These are more just in there so people can see that we did measure it. And also, if you go and do this yourself, you can compare against us if you really want. And the percentage of the intrusion detected that we got was 66%. So they found about 2/3 of what we'd done. I'd been creating Kinesis Firehose, delivery streams over in Sao Paulo. They didn't find those. They didn't find quite a lot of stuff. And what we realized is there was a lack of tooling here for people to be able to find stuff in regions that we didn't expect. One of the interesting things I got was a question asking whether this was realistic. I was like, but this wouldn't really happen. I'm like, this is just one person that is really angry that day. This is one set of compromised credentials. That's all we needed to be able to do this. So sometimes people think that security breaches happen to other people and they just assume it won't happen to them, or they don't really think about it. So that was a really interesting question I got. Interestingly, that was from the person who left his GitHub credentials in AWS. So, he copped it worse than most. I think one of the things is like backups never fail, restores do. Like when you back up a database, you want to check you can restore it. Just because you put all the security in place, you actually want to test these things. Like just locking it with KMS, you need to test that the KMS key actually works. You need to check that your MFA is set properly. You need to check all these things are actually in place and they get tested. What it came down to in the end was, at the end of the day, if people aren't aware of the OODA loop, it came through the Air Force in the US and effectively from Major John Boyd. And if you can iterate through this loop faster than the other people, then you get more situational awareness and you'll be able to beat them. John Boyd went undefeated in dogfights and would beat everyone in about 30 seconds because he could do this. And the loop goes through 4 steps: observe, orient, decide, and act. So with observability, as I was kind of saying, that the tooling wasn't really there for them to be able to find what we were doing. We realized we actually had massive tooling gaps. People couldn't iterate through accounts and regions very quickly to see what was happening. Everything was being driven through the console. And as we kind of know, console is quite slow for a lot of things. Like, how do we make this better? And from that, we started looking at what had we built for clients that we should be reusing? What do we need to buy? What do we need to build? how can we actually build this? And naturally, from this, you want to capture the ideas, you capture the improvements, and you slam them in Jira because that's where all good ideas go from software. And what this became was a beginning of a tradition. This was kind of a little bit unexpected, but the bit I'm kind of proudest of from actually doing this is it became a tradition to spend company days focusing on security initiatives. So the next step after this was we actually ran an internal capture the flag event. After that, we ran a public capture the flag event at a conference where we got people from the city in to come and actually do this stuff. And these are still things that people talk about, new hires are told about, and everyone wants to be involved in because there's something a bit different, there's something more fun, and really you learn a lot from doing this. And to kind of bring it all together, it's like, why red team? Why should you do this? If I'm selling this to a client, how do I sell it to them? How do you sell it internally if you think this is a good idea for your business? And when it comes down to it, what's the difference between a novice and a master? And I'd like to use a chess metaphor here, that a novice looks at the board and sees pieces, and they have to build the entire state from these pieces. A master sees the board in terms of patterns, things they've seen before. They're able to move quicker, faster, and drive better outcomes because they have the experience. And this is a really effective way that in the end of the day, doesn't cost an amazing amount to do, that helps you just take people who are novices in the security space and drive them over to mastery. And with that, I'll leave it.
Excuse me, fantastic, Josh. That was an awesome story. Now, for the people at the conference, they don't know this, but you can see me and I can see you because we're broadcasting from Zoom over to Brella. And then when I started laughing and then you started laughing because at one point I thought, wow, the level of deviousness in this operation is awesome.
Yeah, I think every company has those kind of people where they're like, the CEO and the CTO had the idea for this, and they picked me as their first person to come to drive this. So I'm like, okay, well, that says a lot about what you think of me, but also, yes, you're probably right that I am probably the right person who can tend into sociopathic tendencies for a day and start to drive this and drive stress on everyone else. But at the end of the day, it was good hide in the end.
I thought it was a wonderful story and a proper SRE story. A lot of our customers were dipping their toes into SRE. They don't quite realize what is involved, to getting this right in terms of fire drills and red team attacks. Now, on that note, I'm going to pop across to say hello to Carrie. Hi, Carrie. How did you find that?
Hey, hi. That was really cool. I've made a lot of notes. I love the idea. It's especially the whole novice to mastery and like creating these experience environments where people just build up the experience that they need to move to mastery. It's really great.
Carrie, do we have questions coming in? Surely we've had a ton coming in on that talk.
We have not had any questions come in yet. If anyone has questions, please send them through.
I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I think that's a technical glitch. In that case, I want to ask my questions. When did this happen and how has it evolved? That was what was on my mind.
So we did this, I think it was late 2018, we did this. Now I'm no longer with the company in question. Instead, I sell this on to clients now as part of a thing. But yeah, from there, it really did change the culture of that company. We then sold it, I told this story to clients that we already had going that and like, okay, awesome. We want to do this now. It's something that we want to invest and we want you to help run it, right? And then, from the CTFs and everything else, it really did drive that. All of a sudden, everyone invested in learning KMS better a week later because I started, I'm like, no, we need to be better about this. We can't be a risk to clients from a security perspective. So, it was really impactful to everyone, and everyone's now 10 times better at security than they were that day.
Awesome. I think we're going to be doing something similar now at Container Solutions. Now, Carrie, I think we've got some questions coming in now.
Yeah, we have. Thank you. Alexander has asked, from my understanding, Red Team started with something like leaked credentials. Have you ever simulated an incident purely from the outside?
So I mean, quite often companies have pen testing or anything else. So this was effectively based on leaked credentials. And that was quite a realistic scenario we took. Like, what I often find with clients of mine is they do pen testing, which is, you know, you're testing your surface, but really, realistically, there is always a hole in your surface. You do not have perfect security. No one does. So this was kind of just jumping over that bit and kind of going, okay, assume you've got leaked credentials to AWS infrastructure. What actually happens at that point? Because often pen testing stops kind of one level down. And especially if you don't have VMs and stuff like that, I think this is a little bit more of a modern spin, but it is important.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Peter asks, what was your team rehearsing incident response before you did red team exercise?
Yeah. No, we hadn't really. This was kind of the first time we'd invested the time into it. It was something like as we scaled and everything else, and a bit of it was as we had more junior people in at first. Everyone that was hired wasn't quite senior and generally do the right kind of things, but it was just a case of we're putting people on clients and scaling out the clients. We're dealing with clients that have more regulations and all that kind of stuff. We need to be better about this. So we invested in it from then. Yeah, the incident response was kind of put down a piece of paper. It did get tested a couple of times, little bits, but never with this kind of thought and planning going into it.
I'm curious, after everyone swore at you, did they thank you? Like, were they like, that was actually really cool?
Yeah, no, everyone was, once the adrenaline dropped off, the problem was if anyone saw me in a corner on my laptop not talking to anyone, everyone just instantly distrusted me when asked me what I was doing, which I, found quite entertaining, to be honest. But yeah, it was all good-hearted in the end. Like no one hated me for this.
Okay, so there was no like long-term grudges.
No.
Okay. The anonymous has asked, maybe I missed it, but how do you document the results of these events? What do you think about run books?
Yeah, so we, as I mentioned as went along, so we just kind of tracked the numbers. We had it up on a whiteboard where it lasted for quite a while of all the things we did and all the things that were caught. We had a log in Slack of everything that we did as the red team side. Yeah, from this you can get runbooks and stuff like that. We were very big on automating everything, so it became this giant security backlog which our bench worked against as and when for the longest time, and then we just prioritized and went through it from there. Runbooks are great, but they still require people at the end of the day, and we were trying to look at how we could, especially as a consultancy, you can't always rely on people being available. So it was very much, how can we do this in a way that it stays fixed and is automated away?
Right. On that note, it's time to say thank you and goodbye to you, Josh. And that's because if we don't hurry up, people are going to miss one of two things: the SRE quiz, which is over on track 1, or they're going to miss yoga stretching, which is over on track 4. Where are you going, Josh? Quiz or yoga?
I'll probably go over to the quiz. I think my own attempts at yoga have normally resulted in pain. So
on that note then, Josh, we thank you for the talk. We wish you a wonderful day, what's left of it, and we'll see you next time. And Carrie, thank you for the questions.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye.